Hello, and welcome to the 40th anniversary of the Denver Ballet Guild's Young Dancers Competition. We will begin shortly with our Category 2 preliminary round of variations, and would like to introduce you to our esteemed panel of judges for this year's competition. Principal dancer with the Philadelphia Ballet, former dancer with the American Ballet Theater, faculty member at the School of Philadelphia Ballet, Colorado native, and former winner of the Young Dancers Competition, Sterling Baca. Former soloist with the Birmingham Royal Ballet, former faculty member at the Swedish National Ballet School and the Joffrey Ballet, and current director of the Kansas City Ballet School, Oliver Till. Award-winning choreographer, former principal and current rehearsal director with the Oklahoma City Ballet, Dayoung Jung. And on tabulation, we have Katie Rasby from Denver Ballet Guild. Before we continue, we kindly ask that you take a moment to silence your cell phones. Additionally, we remind you that photography and videography of any kind are not permitted. Every dancer's registration includes professional media coverage, and all participants will receive access to this footage at the conclusion of the competition, courtesy of our sponsor, Candidly Created. While you are here, we invite you to visit our wonderful local sponsors in the lobby. You will find incredible dancewear retailers, the University of Denver Dance Archive, and Roll Recovery, which offers a variety of recovery tools to keep your dancers healthy. The Bridge Dance Project is also on site providing free point readiness assessments as well as injury and hypermobility screenings, among other valuable resources. We also encourage you to stop by the Denver Ballet Guild table in the lobby. With a long and rich history of supporting dance in our community, the Guild welcomes anyone interested in getting involved. And now we are ready to continue with our first group of Category 2 preliminary round variations. Up first, we have number 1 performing a variation from Graduation Ball. Thank you. Up next, we have number 2 performing Violante variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 3, performing Bluebird Variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 4, performing a variation from Graduation Ball. Thank you. Up next, we have number 6, performing Bluebird Variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 7, performing a variation from Graduation Ball. Thank you. Up next, we have number 8, performing a variation from Sleeping Beauty, Bluebird. Thank you. Up next, we have number 9, performing Bluebird variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 10 performing Bluebird Variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 11 performing Odalisque Variation from Le Corsaire. Thank you. Up next, we have number 12 performing Bluebird Variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 13 performing Violante Variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 14 performing Bluebird Variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 15 performing Bluebird Variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Next, we have number 16 performing Bluebird Variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up Up next, we have number 17 performing Violante Variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 18 performing Violante Variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 19 performing Peasant Pas de Deux Variation from Giselle. Thank you. Up next, we have number 20 performing a variation from Graduation Ball. Thank you. Up next, we have number 21 performing Odalisque variation from Le Corsaire. Thank you. Up next, we have number 22 performing Violante variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 23 performing variation for Graduation Ball. Thank you. Up next, we have number 24 performing a variation from Graduation Ball. Thank you. Up next, we have number 25 performing Violante Variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 34 performing a variation from Graduation Ball. Thank you. Up next, we have number 35, performing Odalisque variation from Le Corsaire. Thank you. Up next, we have number 36, performing Bluebird variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 38, performing Bluebird variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next is number 39, performing Bluebird variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 40 performing Odalisque variation from Le Corsaire. Thank you. Up next, we have number 41 performing a variation from Graduation Ball. Thank you. Up next, we have number 42 performing a variation from Graduation Ball. Thank you. Up next, we have number 43, performing a variation from Graduation Ball. Thank you. Up next, we have number 44, performing a variation from Graduation Ball. Thank you. Up next, we have number 45, performing Violante variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 46, performing Odalisque variation from Le Corsaire. Thank you. Up next, we have number 47, performing Odalisque variation from Le Corsaire. Thank you. Up next, we have number 48, performing a variation from Graduation Ball. Thank you. Up next, we have number 49, performing Bluebird variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 50, performing Bluebird Variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 51, performing Violante Variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. Up next, we have number 52, performing a variation from Graduation Ball. Thank you. Up next, we have number 53 performing a variation from Graduation Ball. Thank you. Up next, we have number 54 performing a variation from Graduation Ball. Thank you. Up next, we have number 55 performing Odalisque variation from Le Corsaire. Thank you. Up next, we have number 56, performing Odalisque variation from Le Corsaire. Thank you. Up next, we have number 57, performing Bluebird variation from Sleeping Beauty. Thank you. That concludes our Category 2 preliminary round of variations. Thank you, dancers, for your wonderful performances. As a reminder, please turn in your numbers before you leave, and we look forward to seeing you back in the auditorium at 1:20 for the start of our wellness seminar. Parents, coaches, and teachers are welcome and encouraged to attend, and it is a required component for all participants and will factor into a competitor's eligibility for the final round. Thank you, and we will see everyone soon. Up there? I think they'll just stand.
Okay, now there's 4 and they want a mic for each of them. Do they want one to share?
Let's touch base because we have a little time.
Yeah.
So let's go find them. I told them I'd bring. You stay here. I'll bring them to you.
Okay.
They're lagging
Here
behind.
they are. This is Jan.
Hi.
Jan, Greg.
You're a blur, but hi.
Not a problem. So I've got it up there. Just tell me when you need to fast forward a slide and I can do that.
So what's the secret? What's the secret
Whatever you
signal?
like. Next slide, please, or just
How about you set up the slides? What's our secret?
Next
Sign
slide.
to him.
I mean,
Okay,
you gotta be
next
very
slide.
clear.
So,
Next slide.
Proceed.
so he would like to know whether you each want a microphone or do you want to like share two or have one?
can just
pass
pass
it
We,
around?
one.
we can just
Yeah,
have
we can
one
just do
and
one.
pass it.
okay.
Yeah.
Would you
Yeah.
like some chairs up there? Or
I'm okay without.
okay.
Yeah, we're pretty informal.
Oh, half hour I can manage.
Well, I've got a mic ready for you here. It's muted right now, so that way you don't have to worry about mic drops or anything like that.
Fabulous.
And I can, when you're ready to go up, just come and get me. Have it there. Everything else is ready to go. Oh, there's some more lights on the front.
Could I have my mic?
Yes, you may.
just follow him.
Hello, welcome back, or welcome to some of you who are here for the first time. My name is Francisco Estevez. I'm one of the co-artistic directors of the Young Dancers Competition. I've lived in Denver for over a decade now and have been a part of the dance community in various ways. I was a dancer with Colorado Ballet for many years as well. I'm really excited to present the Bridge Dance Project today. They will be leading our wellness seminar. We at the competition here really value the wellness component. It's a very important part of your training. It's not supplemental to your technique, but it should be something that really goes hand in hand. And we believe that having a really strong emphasis on that, making it a required component for all of the participants is something that we really value. Having parents, having coaches, having teachers involved, studio directors is also a really integral part of this, because it's really easy for us to talk to the kids on their own and they absorb some of the information, but unless we have a really full-on top-down, bottom-up approach, a lot of the things that we'll talk about today don't always make it to the necessary places to be implemented. And just like when you're in the classroom or on stage, it's going to take you more than one time to hear a correction and apply it. You're not going to get your pirouettes right away. You're going to have to practice it over and over. So just like that, the wellness component of your training is also something that has to be repeated and implemented from a ground-up level. So we really value having dance professionals in the community. These are all local partners. I am also a member of the Bridge Dance Project for the Colorado chapter. And so in my work with them, I started talking to them. They were involved last year as well. But this time they are leading the wellness seminar for us, and I'm just going to hand it over to them, to Jan, to introduce the Bridge Dance Project, talk a little bit about their mission, and then everybody else will also introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very. Is this on? Yes, it's on. I can hear. Hi, I'm Jan Dunn. I am, along with my partner here, Alice Barnes. We are co-team leaders of the local Bridge Dance Project chapter. We have chapters all over the country, in Canada and UK as well. We have also Alyssa Arms, who's one of our members here, and Tasha Trujillo also, who will be presenting today. I'll turn the microphone over to them after I briefly talk about the bridge. And how about next slide, please? You can see us, we're all here. And next slide, please, because this is what I really want you guys to know. Next slide. What is the Bridge Dance Project? It is a nonprofit, 5-year-old organization that, as I mentioned, has chapters all over the US, Canada, and the UK. We're growing slowly but surely. It was started 5 years ago by a conversation between myself and Casey Cope-Jones, who owns Apollo Performance Shocks, which, if you aren't familiar with those, they're phenomenal for dance, and they've been proven to reduce the shock force on dancers' feet. But in that conversation, we realized that we had a shared passion to introduce dance medicine and science information, especially into the competition dance community, where it has not been shared for the most part. Dance medicine and science is about 40 years old, and it has well integrated the professional ballet world, Broadway, modern dance companies, academic dance, has barely touched the competition dance field. So that's why we formed. We have an international board of professionals drawn from both competition dance and the dance medicine field, people like these professionals. So that's what we're all about. And hold on, I do have notes. I don't use the phone, I'm just using this. I think I want to go to the next slide, because I think I'll talk a little bit more about the bridge itself at the end of the presentation. But I want to turn this over, next slide, because we've gone through there. Next one, here we go. I think I turn this over to you guys.
Hi, everybody. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Alice Barnes. I'm the owner of the Performance Shift. So we are a sports physical therapy clinic that also integrates nutrition, performance training, and wellness resources for dancers and performers across the spectrum. I'm a board-certified sports clinical specialist, which means I did specialty residency training in adolescent sports medicine in general. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit today about what an injury might mean versus muscle soreness, and then I'll share with my colleagues from here. So when you guys are looking at this slide, hands up, how many of you have had a dance injury throughout your careers? Oh my gosh, look around, there's a ton of hands up, right? Me too. So what we talk a lot about with our dancers and teachers and coaches and parents is what's the difference between an injury versus DOMS. Does anybody know what DOMS means? No, it's up on the screen. Maybe. Yes, I'm hearing whispers. So that means delayed onset muscle soreness. When you're picking up a new skill, you're increasing your dance hours throughout the week. Are we having muscle soreness, which I think is different for people to really recognize between pain and soreness? Does it last for 24 to 48 hours after we've learned a new skill or picked up dancing after vacation or some time off, or we're increasing our new skill sets? Or is something really painful and it's limiting our daily activities like walking in school, doing things around the house, or you're feeling that shooting, like red blinking flag of, okay, the base of my heel really hurts when I'm walking around. Or I just grew 4 to 6 inches and all of a sudden my hip is in a ton of pain and it's limiting my ability at the studio. So that's when you start to integrate with, do you work with a dance medicine specialist from a preventative perspective, meaning I'm going to work with somebody before I get hurt and see what my injury risk factors are. Maybe I have a limited range of motion or some weakness throughout my body, or am I just learning a new skill and I'm having that muscle development? So we really look at, is it that 24 to 48 hour timeline where you're a little sore and it goes away and you can keep dancing along your way, or are we having sharp stabbing shooting pain that's lasting a little bit longer? So that's that first point that we're talking about today. You guys can also see there's a whole list of red flags here. So if you can't read that, that's like persistent pain, which means it's continuing on and on for more than 2 or more weeks. You maybe had trauma. I had a dancer a couple weeks ago practicing a new skill. She fell and had her kneecap slide off to the side and back in. That's a traumatic injury that she's got a ton of swelling, some bruising. She can't stand up normal. That's not typical. You may look at some of that severe pain I was talking about. A lot of people talk about having pain in their heels, or you're just getting on point and you're not used to that movement. It typically may correlate with a growth spurt that you just had. Other things that we look at are, did you feel or hear a pop? Similar situation. Is that in your hip, maybe in your shoulder? We're starting to use our hands and upper body weight bearing a lot more often in dance. And then do we look at numbness, tingling, burning? That typically describes a nerve pain or sensation. Also, you probably shouldn't have that walking around day to day. The last couple things we look at, are you unable to walk or lift a limb? We call your arms and your legs limbs. You should be able to move those pretty freely. And then any swelling, bruising, just like I described, my kiddo that fell, had a lot of bruising on her knee. That's not something that we want to have linger on, and then we can address pretty early on. The faster you get in to see a dance medicine specialist, the quicker you tend to return back on stage. So that's why we love building relationships with dance medicine providers in the community, but also teachers and parents as well. If you don't have a PT that you work with in the community, Alyssa and I can share a bunch of resources from different people that are throughout the state too. And then finally, I'm actually a concussion specialist, so concussions also happen in dance, or they happen outside of the studio, and then we bring them inside. How many of you participate in activities that's not just dance? We got a couple hands up here and there, right? Or what about if you participate in like a gym class at school, or you're running on resource? Yeah, a couple more hands. So sometimes you slip, you fall, you bump your head. Concussions don't just happen from hitting your head on the ground. It can also be a whiplash injury. If you've been in a car accident, it's snowy outside, something happens. Those are different things that we can help you guys address as well that will affect your balance and stability and tracking that'll contribute to your dance success. So if you guys have any questions on those things, Alyssa and myself will be out in the lobby and we can answer some more of those too. But I'm going to hand this off to her to introduce and talk about some more concepts.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Alyssa Arms. I am the owner of Back in Step Physical Therapy in Centennial, where I specialize in treating dancers. I've been a dancer my entire life. I'm also part-time faculty with the University of Colorado Physical Therapy program, so I get to provide education to them as well, to kind of start talking a little bit more specifically about this idea of injury risk reduction. And we intentionally use this terminology of reduction versus prevention. We know that being dancers, and we saw from all the hands up earlier when Alice asked how many of you have had a dance injury, injuries are a thing that come along with being a dancer. So it's not that we are preventing them, we are trying to reduce the risk that they're going to happen. We're trying to reduce the impact that it actually has when they do happen. So that's why we're using some of that terminology. We have 3 main categories that we're going to talk about really briefly, but overall fitness, overall health, and then other options. So an important one when we're thinking about overall fitness is this idea of dance-specific training versus cross-training. Some examples of things like dance-specific training would be something like Pilates, gyrotonics, if you're doing progressing ballet technique classes, any of those kinds of things that feel very dance-like in the exercise that you're doing. They all can provide a lot of benefit. They help with strength, coordination, and balance, but it's doing a lot of the same types of movements that you're already doing with all of your dance training on a regular basis. So we often, from the dance medicine world, like to talk more about this idea of cross-training. We are encouraging your body to do other movements because first and foremost, you are a regular human out in the world who has to do regular human things, and we need to make sure that we're supporting you for that first, and then also supporting you in your dance and the artistry that you're doing. So doing things where we're not always in turnout. When we're thinking about ballet, for example, we're going to strengthen muscles that also oppose that. We're not always doing the same kinds of movements that you're doing in dance. And that just helps your body be really well-rounded with things. Cardio is another big one. How many of you feel like you do a lot of cardio work when you're dancing? Yeah. We work hard while we're dancing, but if we actually were to quantify it, put a number to it, we don't spend as much time at high intensity cardio that we think we do. It may feel like it, but we don't actually get there. And so a lot of times doing additional cardio work is a really important part. How many of you, even this weekend as you're out here performing or taking a class, you come out and you've been rehearsing this, but then you're done and you're panting because you're feeling exhausted. Doing some additional cardio work could help you feel like you're making it through that time a little bit better. Balance is another one where we may assume that because we're doing dance and we can do all of these beautiful things, including things like pirouettes like we mentioned earlier, that balance is fantastic. There are other elements of balance that sometimes need some additional work. We can do things helping with spotting in your pirouettes or turns, for example. One fun statistic fun, not so fun statistic when it comes to balance that is in the works of being published right now. They did some studies with adolescent dancers where they had to stand on a flat foot, arms crossed and eyes closed, and see how long that they could stand like that. They found that dancers who were not able to do that for at least 30 seconds were at a 7 to 10 time higher likelihood of having some sort of injury. So despite doing a lot of dance training, sometimes we need to do a little bit extra in some of these areas. Reactive control is another one, being able to react if something changes. Maybe there's a slick spot on the stage, maybe your shoe does something strange while you're performing or rehearsing, for example. So we can train that as well. And then strength training kind of goes back to some of those ideas with cross-training, making sure that we are supporting your body in multiple directions, multiple muscle groups, and supporting what you need to be able to do specifically. So something that we'll even do throughout a dance season or sort of a span of a show, help create a specific strengthening program for you to support the variations that you're working on right now versus something else that you're working on for a show later in the spring, for example. So we can help tailor some of that on things. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the health stuff?
So part of this, if you guys look at the second section there, your overall health. So how many of you get like 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night? Oh my gosh, guys, that's not a whole room. Okay, some hands coming up. So sleep is really, really important to your development, increasing your ability to continue to recover and decreasing your inflammation that tends to happen as you're increasing muscle development. And then a big piece we talk about with a lot of our dancers is our nutrition component. Alyssa and I were giggling earlier that we talk to our dancers all the time about needing to have snacks throughout your sessions and 3 quality meals a day. And even as dance medicine providers, we get really busy and forget to feed our bodies. But that's a huge key component in your ability to continue to perform and to develop your new techniques and muscle development from there as well. The third piece that we also talk about is hydration. So whether that's bringing in electrolytes into your water intake, but really trying to get as much hydration, or water in that case, as your body weight at minimum. So if I weigh 100 pounds, I should really look at getting 100 ounces of water throughout the day. And that's gonna keep my body going, and so I'm not having headaches, dizziness. And I think when we get really busy throughout classes, I'm seeing some faces throughout the room, we kind of forget to take some drinks of water. Oh my gosh, everybody just picked up their water bottle as I said that. And then the last 3 here is stress management, taking care of your old injuries, and that preventative care model. So stress management, do you guys feel a little bit stressful outside of the studio? Like with school, friends, your parents, maybe some siblings, lots of head nods, yeah? So your body can't differentiate the stress you put on in the studio versus the stress you have outside in the community. It sees it the exact same. So ways that we do this is through breath work, journaling, meditation, taking some time away from the studio and doing some self-reflection. Tasha's gonna talk about taking care of your mental health as well as your physical health too. Okay? And then that last couple piece is taking care of old injuries and that preventative care that Alyssa was talking about. If you continue to dance through some old injuries that we've had, it maybe gets a little bit better and then keeps popping up now and again. The earlier that we can take care of that, the better. And then building you an individualized, maybe it's a warm-up, cool-down program that addresses those injuries over time because your body's gonna continue to grow and develop. It's not like you take care of an ankle injury once and then the likelihood of that ever happening again is 0. Like, how often do you get on point or you do a new skill? Then you might roll your ankle on stage. A lot of times, maybe. So if we're really building that strength over time and developing, maybe it's like 2 to 4 exercises that you go into your warm-ups with, then you're gonna reduce your likelihood of a re-injury. How often do your dance teachers tell you to show up a little bit early to the studio to make sure your body's nice and warm before you get into class? Raise your hand. So look around. How often do we actually show up 10 to 15 minutes early and warm up our bodies before class? Okay, so like a quarter of you raised your hand. So that's one really easy thing to do too.
And I'm gonna add something. How many of you do stretching as your warm-up?
Oh, good one.
Versus actually like warming up your body?
Activating it.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
That's what we're talking about. So we want like your butt on fire before you start doing a lot of single leg work across the stage. And well, I don't know exactly the verbiage that Alyssa uses. I tell all my dancers, we are like priming the pump. You want your leaps and jumps to be higher, you have to make those muscles turn on that are then going to do that, and then train the body to be able to absorb all of the weight that we just put into the air. And that's gonna make you more graceful and more resilient throughout the time too. So I'll let Alyssa do the last little section here, and then we'll go on.
So last couple little things, practicing good technique seems like an obvious point, but making sure that if there's things, especially if you're getting consistent corrections on them, whether you're seeking out some feedback, private lessons with your dance instructors, or working with somebody, again, like a dance medicine specialist, who can help you kind of figure out what does this correction mean for you so that you can have the best technique that supports your body, your anatomy, and what we're asking of the body to do. Make sure that you're building your team, which we're gonna talk about more here in a second. So just like people who do sports like football or soccer or that kind of thing, they have their team of providers and specialists that they work with. Dancers deserve to have those teams as well. And then listen to your body. Your body tells you a lot of information. And if it's telling you, something feels off, listen to it. It might even be something just to go talk with your dance instructor about, oh, I'm noticing this. Do you see something off with my technique while I'm doing this, for example? Next slide. So this is where we get into this advocacy piece, or the idea of building your team. So we've already mentioned a few times the importance of working with somebody like a dance medicine specialist, somebody who understands what it is that you do day in, day out, that can help support you with your goals with dance, whether that is dancing for fun and recreationally right now, or going on to pursue a big professional career. We're here to help with that. But if you don't have a specialist available, make sure that the person that you're working with, you're giving them some specifics. Is there a particular position that really bugs you? It's when I'm turning out with my legs straight, when my hip is bugging me, and when I have weight on it. Ask for modifications whenever possible instead of just stopping dance. We'll tell you as dance medicine specialists that we don't take it lightly when we have to tell somebody we need to temporarily take some time away from dance. We're recommending that when it really is important. We're not gonna say, oh, just stop dancing, your pain will go away. That's not what we're here for. So when we are giving that recommendation, it's for a very specific purpose. It's okay to disagree with the provider that you're working with, and it's okay to ask for a second opinion. That's why we have lots of people to be able to talk with. Ask lots of questions if you're not understanding what it is, if you don't feel like there's good communication between the two of you. It is okay to ask questions. And then this last one kind of goes back to some of the preventive stuff that Alice was talking about, working with a dance specialist before you need them. It makes things a lot easier if we already have an opportunity to get to know you, get to know how your body is functioning, what things you're working on, so that if an injury does pop up at some point, we know where you've been, we know what is more of your normal and what we've already been working on to help you through that process a little bit more easily, as opposed to waiting until there's a problem. We certainly can help you at that point, but we have some missing information. So build that team early, find your people, and ask questions if you can't go see a specialist. Next slide, and I think this goes to Tasha's. So we'll let Tasha take over.
Okay. Hello. So I'm Dr. Trujillo. I'm a counseling and sports psychologist. I found my way to this group and to working through dancers because I'm the staff psychologist for the Colorado Ballet. I worked in college athletics for a long time, and now I'm in private practice where I work with college, professional, and Olympic athletes. I also work with a professional running team, professional soccer team, and USA track and field. So I'm going to be talking to you about some common challenges that I see working specifically with dancers. So this is not an exhaustive list, but I kind of asked myself, what do I see most frequently from the dancers that I work with? Every week when I go into the ballet, what do I know I'm going to get a little bit of? So anxiety, and we can talk about this from a performance domain, so if it's specific to an upcoming show or an upcoming class with an instructor who brings up a lot of anxiety, but this is also life stuff too. Do you get nervous when you have to take a test, or do you get nervous when you have to make a new friend or when you're in a new environment? Eating disorders and body image distress, the thing I want to make clear there is that all types and body sizes can encompass eating disorders, so we're not just looking for a particular aesthetic, and oftentimes the image does not tell us what's really going on. Grief and loss. This one, sometimes people get a little confused about, or like, oh, I had never really thought of that. Sometimes when I do a longer presentation about mental health in the dance community, I have an entire slide that I just create based on the week that I had before at the ballet, where I will make lists, probably 10 to 20 items of different types of grief and loss that dancers experience. Whether it's casting comes out and they're not thrilled with where they are, they get injured, and they're humans too. So maybe they have a death in the family, or maybe they have to make a sacrifice and they have to do something for dance when the rest of their family is going on vacation, or their friend has a Sweet 16 and they don't get to go because they have a competition somewhere else, things like that. And then perfectionism is huge. I talk about this every single day in my practice. Unrealistic expectations, obsessive and compulsive tendencies that is different than the disorder. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so I do want to talk a little bit about performance anxiety because I feel like this is probably the question that I get asked most frequently by parents of younger dancers. I do a little bit of work with the Colorado Ballet Academy, And so this comes up a lot, so I felt like this might be really good to go through. So if you are a dancer, I kind of want you thinking about, do I ever struggle with these things? And if you are a parent or a teacher, I want you thinking about, have I noticed this in my child or in the people, or in the children that I'm around? So what could this look like? Poor execution. You might know exactly how to go through with a certain move, and it's not happening, right? You've rehearsed it, you know it in your sleep, but when it comes to executing it, it's not going well. Extreme fear. Oftentimes we will have people who go to do a certain thing and they almost have this mental block that either physically or emotionally stops them. They cannot follow through. Apprehension or inability, sort of the same thing there. Pressure. Pressure is huge in this space where you are in your head, you are trying to figure out and manage other people's emotions in the room. You really want to impress someone, and so you're really fixated on that. Show of hands, has anyone ever struggled with that? Yeah, absolutely. Having high expectations for yourself. There's nothing wrong with having high expectations, but when they become perfectionistic, right? When you see failure as the end and you're not able to look at that as feedback, that can become a problem. If you notice yourself being stuck on past failures, sometimes I will work with dancers or athletes who cannot stop replaying a mistake in their head. It's the only thing they think about. And so it's really hard to then show up and be present and move on to the next thing if they're unable to do that. Future tripping. I see this every day where people are telling me the future. Well, I know this is going to happen to me tomorrow. I know this is going to happen next time I try to do this. So I'm always like, how do you know that? Where are the facts there? Physical symptoms of anxiety. Oftentimes we see this manifested. There can be some shaking, pretty uneasy on your feet. We can see this through sweating. We can see this through heart palpitations or feeling like your heart is racing. Sweating and or chills. Sometimes there's numbness or tingling in your hands, dizziness at times, dry mouth at times, so lots of different things there. Panic. That also means you feel like your throat's closing, you're not able to breathe, hyperventilating, feel like you're gonna pass out. And then also focus issues. So maybe you're listening. I see this during class all the time at the ballet, where sometimes you can always tell when a dancer's kind of off in their own space doing their own thing. Because they'll give a set and nope, nothing. They're like, oh shoot. So they're just not able to stick with it. Okay, next slide. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about grief and loss because again, I feel like this is, well, full disclosure, I specialize in grief and loss, so this is my favorite clinical area. But because I see it so much, I felt like it would be really important to give people some tips. What can we do? How do we talk about this? So in the moment, volunteering more specific support. Sometimes we hear, oh, like I'm here if you need me. But how often, like, do we know what we need? How do we bring that up? How do we follow through? So being able to give your dancers specific support. Do you need me to help sew some shoes tonight? Would that be helpful? Do you need me to help with your homework tonight? Would that be helpful? Whatever it might be. Validating complex and confusing emotions. What we know about grief is that it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And just to clarify, anytime we experience a loss that is really significant to us, this is not just about death. Let's say you tried out, you auditioned, and you wanted this role in this part so badly and you didn't get it. That is grief, right? That is grief. You have to go through the emotions of losing something that was important to you, losing out on opportunity. So it's really complex and it's really confusing. And so being able to validate that, it's okay. If one day maybe you're feeling like you're okay, and then the next day you're feeling like you're in the hole again, it is very, very messy. Normalize how much it sucks. What I find oftentimes is that people just want to make their dancers feel better. And so it's like, oh, look on the bright side, or oh, at least fill in the blank, whatever you have to say. And I encourage a different route. It's okay to just sit in that suck sometimes. Let them feel it. Let them feel it. When you encourage them too much, sometimes it can invalidate their experience and then they shut down and feel like, oh, I can't feel this. But again, going back to grief, if you lose something that's really important to you, you're gonna need to feel that. Asking what kind of response they may need. This is something I educate the ballet masters at the ballet about quite a bit, because they don't always know how feedback is best received from their dancers, and so they might try one approach and that does not go well, and then we need to kind of help reinvent the wheel and have some communication. What kind of response might be useful for what they're going through? Making space for all of the feelings, even the ones that you don't agree with or don't make sense to you. And then encourage focus on basic needs. Long term, with grief and loss, I do encourage people to check in over time. So, for example, I had a dancer mid-season this season bring up that they were still grieving a role that they didn't get casted in from last season, and it was affecting their performance now. That was not even on my radar. I hadn't thought about it. And so that was so important for me. That was such a good check, because it's like, yes, even over time, these things still come back. And that is something that is characteristic of grief. With the most significant losses that we have, it doesn't go away. Giving them permission to take as long as they need. There is not a timeline for grief, so this can be really challenging when you, again, just want to love and support and make your loved one feel better. But being able to truly take a step back and say, it's okay, it's okay. I think about the word still a lot, like, oh, you're still thinking about that? You're still struggling with that? I think of still as a bit of a bad word in the grief world, because it does. It sends expectations that you should be over it. And that can make us feel a lot more isolation, a lot more shame, and be a lot harder, again, to move through and cope with. Consider identity factors. So a big one here is injury. If you are known, this happened to me. My sport was actually basketball. I have no background in dance. But when I got injured, basketball was my entire life. It was all I had done for my first big injury, so I was probably 10 years into my career. It was all I knew. I didn't know what I liked to do. When I officially retired from sport, other people didn't know what to ask me. They'd kind of trip over themselves, like, how's basket? What else do you do? I was like, I have no idea. So just thinking about those different components. How is an injury or how is not getting a certain role affecting them? Consider growth factors too. What are the gains? So I think about grief from a gains and losses perspective a lot. My only caveat here, timing. Timing is really important, right? You don't want to show up too much and say, well, let's look at the gains here. How are you growing from this right after something has happened? So in time, right, this is something to bring up. And then do they need to be connected with supports? And sometimes we don't know that right away. This is another question I get a lot from parents. If an injury happens or they didn't get a role that they want, sometimes they're like, should we get them in now? Should we have them talk? And although I love preventative care, sometimes we just don't know how it's going to affect somebody. So thinking about that long term, if at any point in the future, do they need some extra supports to kind of step it back and figure out what's going on? All right, tips to address challenges. Okay, I love this. So pretty much every hour that I work with a dancer, they will come in and they will tell me, I know what so-and-so, I know how they're gonna cast me. I know what they thought of me when I did this variation. And I usually just say, how? How do you know that? They don't, but they're really good at telling themselves stories and convincing themselves that they are true. Has anyone done that before? Yes, okay, so I think this is super important. This is a great mental skill to start to flex. Consider all parts of the story. So let's say you competed and you did not get the role that you wanted or did not get the place that you wanted, and you might be steadfast on this one thing. This is what happened. This is why I didn't get it. I'm gonna invite you to consider all parts of the story. What else? What are some other plausible explanations? Okay. Check your assumptions. Again, what stories are you telling yourself, and is there evidence? The way I like to think about this is, if you were in a court of law and you took the assumptions that you're making in your head and you gave them to a judge and a jury, would they say, oh yeah, there's plenty of sufficient evidence for this, or would they throw it out? Very helpful to think of it like that. Encourage communication. This is huge. I cannot tell you how much I work with professional dancers at learning how to advocate for themselves, how to use those assertiveness skills and speak to what they need. That doesn't mean they're always going to get it, but being able to use those skills is really, really important. Managing your own emotions. So for those of you who are parents, teachers in the room, I think that can be really challenging too. You see your dancer get hurt, or you see your dancer struggling with something, whether it's dance related or not, and you want whatever that emotion is for you, you want to make it go away. And so being able to manage your own emotion We learn to self-regulate through co-regulation. So I think that's also really important here. Teaching process versus outcome. This is probably my favorite sports psych skill. We know we have so much research in the sports psych field to show that if you are only focused on the result, if you're only focused on that outcome, you are going to have a really hard time achieving it because you're not paying attention to the things that happen in between. So I had 5 athletes compete in Paris, all track and field, and we focused not on the time that they needed to get, not on the time that their competitors had their PRs in, but instead we focused on what is your process from start line to finish line. What is your technique? Are you going out hot? You going out slow? When are you going to close the gap? When are you going to empty the tank, right? We focused on those pieces in between that allows them to get to their final goal. So again, for dancers, what is your technique? What is your count? When do you do your different variations? All of those pieces are going to get you to the end product, which is what you want. The last piece, and this is so challenging, and I'm very specific here to use the word manage comparison instead of stop comparison because we're humans and we're always going to compare. We can't completely stop that, but being able to manage that. So one of the ways that I ask my dancers to think about this is the comparison actually helping your performance? What is it actually doing for you? And oftentimes it's not doing anything for them. It's making them feel worse about themselves, their self-talk is worse, their relationships are worse, they feel more isolated, they're judging themselves more harshly. So really being able to recognize the usefulness of that comparison and shift it. Another way I like to think about this is, can you shift that comparison to be competitive with yourself? Can you compare who you're showing up as a dancer today to who you were as a dancer last week, or last month, or last year? So putting it back into the things that you can control. One of my favorite phrases is control the controllables. It's a much better way to manage the comparison tendency. Okay, last thing, actually, let's probably skip to the next one. Okay, this is the last piece I want to mention. Empowering families in the dance environment. What are some things that you can do? Again, this is something that comes up quite a bit. I'll have Ballet Academy parents come up and kind of ask, you know, what does it take to get to the next level? How do we do that? So these are some things, and I also, just to create this slide, I pulled some of my dancers, and I pulled some of the wellness staff that we have at Colorado Ballet too. So I got a lot of opinions to come up with a couple good points here. So first one is listen, support, and be. Know the goals, the values, and the desires of your dancer, and then provide that space for them to be seen and be heard. The listen piece is really big. That doesn't mean you have to agree, that doesn't mean you have to like it, but can you accept it and be with them, even if you feel just a bit differently? Be educated and teach self-advocacy. So sitting here, getting this information from all of us, this is a way to be educated, to kind of understand what is the culture, what are some things that I need to be aware of if my dancer is going to pursue this. And then teaching self-advocacy. I know I already spoke to that a little bit, but I cannot emphasize that enough. Being able to deliver a message, speak to what you need, ask questions. This is one of the coolest things I've seen since I've started at the ballet, is dancers being able to go in and not ask for promotions, but say, this is my goal. Do you see this for me in this company, and how do I get there? Right, very process focused. That's been a game changer for some of the dancers. Insist on balance and battery refills. So please don't be like me. Don't make your craft the only thing that you have, and then when your career is over, nobody knows what to ask you about. Because I didn't know either. I had no idea what they could ask me about. So make sure that you are paying attention to other parts of your life, developing other aspects of who you are, and taking time away. There's something to be said about taking time away from what you do. It is incredibly challenging, especially because these environments can be so competitive and you feel like you always have to do a little bit more and do a little bit extra, but more is not always better. More is not always better. And then the last thing is the values alignment. So this is also something that I talk about so much, especially with college athletes now. If any of you are familiar with the transfer portal and how easy it is for athletes to shift and go different places now, finding the right fit. What are the values of the people in charge of your child? What is the mission? What is the focus? What is the organizational culture of the environment that your child is in? And then as you get older, those are things that you can assess too, right? You as the dancer. Is this clicking with me? Is this something that I really can stand behind and is important? I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Tasha. Finishing up, we just want to say a few more words about the Bridge Dance Project. We have a lot of resources on the website. The website is going to be updated sometime in the next few months, so there will be even more goodies on it, and the way it looks will be a little different. But we do have a resource page, and if you go to that, the resources are for dancers and teachers and parents. And there are different topics on there. They have both articles and videos that you can resource and look at. Some of the ones you can see, some of the different things that are talked about. There's actually something on healthy Irish dancers, if any of you do Irish dance, nutrition things. One of the things that people are not aware of is the hearing loss in dance. Because when many of you go to competitions, the sound levels are so high that there's been research that even young dancers have hearing loss because of that. So there's a lot of different things that you can find on the resources page of the BDP Bridge Dance Project website to look at. Next slide, please. We have a lot of partnerships, as you can see, with different organizations that are all like-minded, meaning health and safety of dancers is #1 priority for all of our organizations. And what this means is that we partner with them and agree to just share information. If we have a workshop that we would like publicized on their network, we would ask that, and vice versa. Next slide, please. Dance Teacher Web, I'm just going to mention it. Is anybody here familiar with Dance Teacher Web? Just curious. Okay. Dance Teacher Web is one of the largest dance teacher organizations for competition dance teachers in the country. It's an annual conference. There's about 1,000 teachers who attend it, and it's very much a recharging of opportunity for teachers to get new information to take back to their kids in the fall. And we have been a part of that. The Bridge Dance Project has been a part of that going on 3 years now, which is really exciting. And it's exciting especially because when I first went 2 years ago, very few teachers were interested in learning this kind of information. And now you go to some of the seminars, which are increasing in number in the dance wellness field, and there are several hundred teachers sitting there just avidly taking up the information. So the growth in interest in this field has been really encouraging. And next slide, please. So contact us. You can come out to our table. Please feel free to take any of the information that's out there, cards, brochures. Everybody here has brochures and cards. Please feel free to take all that. One thing that I do want to mention that is on the table out there, we are going to be developing a newsletter for parents and teachers and dancers. And one of the things that's going to have in it are what we're calling research gems, which is taking new research from the dance medicine and science field and just parsing it down to small, little, knowledgeable pieces of information that you can take into the studio. And it's not scientific language, it's everyday language. So we are doing an anonymous survey that we would like people to fill out. What do you want to see in this new newsletter? And there's some flyers on the table for that. So I would really encourage you to take that and to let us know what you need. I really want to thank our presenters. Thank you, ladies. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I very much want to thank Fran and Tracy for having us here. And thank you, guys.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you so much for the wonderful information and resources. I think we're going to open it up to some Q&A. I know in years past that's been a very popular thing, and so I will be down in the audience, and maybe we'll pass around a mic, so in case parents, dancers, teachers have questions, we're going to do that. Before we get started with that, though, I did just want to remind people, if you haven't checked in already, make sure to go and do that after so that we can take note of your attendance and you get credit for that as well, okay? And then one more thing, I promise, before we get to the Q&A. We have these and more. These are just a few of the members of the Bridge Dance Project local chapter, but we have other resources and other members as well. If you found this presentation or these resources valuable, we will look into maybe sharing the slides with everybody as well. We're also recording the video. But if your dance studio would benefit from this, or if you're a dance teacher or studio owner and you want to organize these types of events, we're available. The Bridge Dance Project is available. They do similar things and clinics at studios around Denver, and I think that's something that, obviously it's a young organization, but we are willing to set up at individual studios as well if it's something that's going to be beneficial for everybody, which I believe it is. So,
Fran, can I
yeah.
say something real quick
Go
about that? What he just mentioned, yes. And one of the things that we've talked about, and this was actually an idea that this gentleman had several years ago and gave me the idea, and I thought it was a great one, is to send out a list of topics that we could talk on at your studio that you might want us specifically to come in. Rather than us saying, oh, we're going to come to you and talk about blah, 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 you tell us what you want to hear about, and then we can organize a workshop based on that. I think that's a terrific idea that I'd like to pursue, so be aware of that, please.
Do we have any questions? Could also be a comment.
Yeah, please comment for sure. How many of you are familiar with this kind of information, that you've heard it before? Could you raise your hands? I'd like to know. Some, but not a lot. Okay.
How many of you feel that you've heard this information, but it's difficult to implement in your daily lives?
Okay, good to know.
Does anybody have any idea as to why?
I think sometimes as dancers we're very busy with everything in life, and so learning how to prioritize our time most efficiently so that we can include all these healthy like habits and stuff. So do you have any like tips on that?
I'll start. I think one of the biggest things is recognizing that the work that you do outside of the studio also supports the work that you do in the studio. And so that helps you kind of get your mind shift to recognize what is also important. So things like sleep and nutrition. If you're not sleeping and you're not eating well, it doesn't matter how many hours you spend in the studio. They're not going to be very effective. So just kind of recognizing what else helps you fill up your cup and making those things a priority to kind of have that balance and recharge, as I mentioned, is really, really important.
I think two things that come to mind as well, when we're talking about some of these changes, even when we're talking about a lot of different topics, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to try making changes in all of these things at once. It could be maybe nutrition is the piece that feels most important to me, and I try changing one thing at a time, see what that does, change something else. The other piece is going back to that idea of having your team of people that you're working with. That's one of our goals also. Like when I'm working with dancers, I always like getting a sense of what does your dance schedule look like? When are your shows and what shows are they, or competitions that are coming up, or that sort of thing. So I get to know a bit more about you as an individual, so then I know how to help give some of that advice and that sort of thing. So, you know, if there are challenges in implementing some of the things, work with the folks that are part of your team, because they probably can help you figure out what can support through all of that.
I think also to piggyback off of that, if you have had an injury or you've been struggling with even just like your turnout or like getting full extension on your leaps, a lot of the things that Alyssa and I will integrate is on like almost a monthly maintenance perspective. A lot of dancers see me once a month and they're like, Alice, this is the skill that I'm struggling with and I'm not quite getting the technique at the studio. My teacher keeps commenting on X, Y, and Z. What are 2 things that I can do, like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, in my warm-up that helps engage those muscles that are helping me go through that skill? So that's something that, like, as dance medicine specialists that we work with our dancers, you might bring in a video or we might talk about a specific technique and we're not giving you 45,000 things to do in a day. You're already doing it. You already work out a bunch in the day. This should be supportive of that. And if you do feel overwhelmed, that's when we integrate some of the mental shifting techniques, or I love when Tasha talks about like flexing the mental game. It's like, okay, I know that these 2 things are gonna make me way more powerful and resilient throughout the rest of the season versus 1,000. Great. Any other questions?
So I know you guys were talking about like the managing comparison over stopping comparison. I know that that's like kind of like an important thing because I feel like that's how we learn and that's how we grow. What are ways, like what are things that we can like tell ourselves in order to improve our overall experience with that?
Oh, that's such a good question. Okay, so I think the first thing is you have to be aware that you're doing it. So I would catch myself first. That's first step, is just kind of knowing and saying to yourself, I'm doing it again. And try to do it without a lot of judgment. Because oftentimes we'll say, oh, I'm doing it again. Oh, I'm so stupid. Or it'll follow up with something that's really defeating. Just notice that you're doing it. The more you notice it, then I think you can kick the gear up to really challenging that. Is this really helping me? I always try to turn it back and have you set some intentions before you go into your competitive space. What do you want to get at? And controlling the controllables is huge. You can always control your effort. You can always control your emotions. Those factors become really big too, because the more your head is over there and focusing on what you can control, it's less about what the person next to you is doing. Does that help? Yeah? Okay.
One thing that I experience a lot is when I'm working with dancers, trying to create a communication channel where they feel like they're able to communicate. That in our industry, from my own personal experience as a professional dancer, doesn't always happen. What are some ways that dancers can feel empowered to do that, but also family members, guardians, parents, to open up those communication channels in a productive way? Because a lot of the times it's easy to have a reactive reaction to a situation that happens at a studio or casting or something like that. I always like to tell myself what's my end goal, and if I can go through some steps to achieve that, that's kind of how I approach how I communicate with anybody. But what are some things that maybe parents just as much as dancers themselves can use to communicate, to open up those difficult lines of communication?
One of the things that I have found to be helpful with some of that is also sort of setting the frame of mind of when you're entering those discussions in the first place. You're not going in already in defense mode or that sort of thing. It's, okay, I want to come in, I want to have a conversation. Maybe I'm talking about, well, this is what my perception was. This is how it makes me feel. These are concerns that I have, and really open up some of the conversation in that way rather than just going in and saying, well, you cast me this way and I don't agree and blah, 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 that sort of thing. So I think part of that is just, what is your intention coming into that conversation and communication with?
I mean, I also think the power dynamic is there, right? So we can't change that. We can't make that go away. But I also encourage, I talk to my college athletes about this all the time, but if you're talking to a coach, right, you're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. It does come back to some of the values alignments and things like that too. Are you in a place where you can walk up to someone who has a lot more power and authority to you and ask to meet and have a conversation? And if you don't feel that, right, if that is not part of the norm, is that a good place for you? And then, of course, there's all the work in the background as far as advocacy and changing some of those cultures, which takes a very long time to do. But that's something that comes to mind for me.
Something that comes to mind for me that she just said, and could I ask a question? How many parents are in the audience? Could you raise your hand? A lot. Okay, good. Parents, I think sometimes parents have more control than they realize, and I think they need to realize that they can do that. This is your kid and who's doing this, and you need to know the information of what's happening. I think it's important also, kind of tagging on to what Tasha said, and if I'm misinterpreting as I say it, please tell me, is making sure that your child is in the right environment, not only for the dancer, but for you in terms of communication with the studio owner and the teacher. I know of a family where I recently lived where the dancer was doing well, but the parent felt completely blocked off from communication with the teachers, so that the parents were not allowed to watch anything. They weren't really allowed to say anything. It was very much power on top from the teachers on down. There was no full exchange, and the family in question moved the daughter to another studio where they had open classrooms, where the teacher actually had videos in each classroom so that the parents could be out in the waiting room watching what their child was doing during the class. It was a completely different psychological environment, and the child thrived in that environment, and the parent felt so much more empowered. And I think that's really important for parents to know in this kind of environment.
How many of the parents that are in here do not have dance or performing arts experience themselves? Yeah, so one of the things that I see sometimes coming up too with parents, especially where you didn't come from this world as a kid yourself and you're living, and experiencing it through your dancer. Sometimes parents are saying, I don't know this world. I don't know what's normal. I don't know what questions to ask. And I would really encourage you to utilize resources, ask those questions, whether it's asking other parents at the studio, asking the instructors that are there, the studio owners, getting to know people in the dance medicine space. There's so many opportunities of people that you can ask those questions of, because until we get a bit of an understanding of this crazy dance world that we're all involved in, sometimes we don't know what we don't know, or we don't know that what we're seeing maybe is not normal, maybe isn't a healthy environment, any of those kinds of things. So don't be afraid to advocate in that way as well.
I can speak to that for sure, because like I said, my background is basketball, which is very different than dance. So yeah, you have to ask questions, and that is, for those of you out there that don't know a lot about it, it is okay to not know and to ask questions.
So we talked about injury prevention, but obviously in the type of activity that these dancers are doing, injury is bound to happen at some point in time. And depending upon the studio that students are at and the duration of how long they're injured, they may, for example, go to the studio and have to take notes, for example, in class. And sometimes I've found that almost perpetuates the mentality of, hey, I can see the other students progressing ahead of me, oh, I'm gonna fall behind. What do you tell your dancers to kind of help them build that mental stamina so that they can kind of empower them to realize in the end that they're gonna be stronger than even possibly when they started?
Yeah, that's the managed comparison piece that I mentioned a little bit earlier, when we can get people to focus on themselves. So let's say you get injured, you're 4 weeks into recovering. Where were you 3 weeks? Where were you at 2 weeks? Where were you at 1 week? So trying to get them to look at, this is my own individualized process and what's going on for me. That is very challenging work, so I'm not saying that is easy to implement, but I do think it is managing some of that comparison and recognizing that everybody's story is different. That also takes me back to the checking assumptions and the seeing all parts of the story, because I think those are also super, super helpful. Oftentimes injured athletes will make assumptions about what other people think about them, or maybe they're not working hard enough, and then they end up getting more injured or overuse or those sorts of things trying to keep up. So just kind of being on top of that as well, I think are great strategies for that.
Something to add into that too is, especially when we're in that environment where it's like, okay, you're dealing with an injury, you're sitting and taking notes or watching or whatever the case may be, that's where, from our perspective as physical therapists, we can help create programs of exercises to keep the rest of you functioning as well as possible, so that when you are coming back, you can hit the ground running and you're not having to catch up for a lot of quote unquote lost time or what feels like lost time. Sometimes we can facilitate some of the conversations with the dance teachers or the studio owners or things like that, where it's like, well, maybe instead of sitting and taking notes, could they be working on some of their rehab program in the corner or out in the lobby? Or, you know, are there opportunities where we can find a balance to support them in that recovery time as well, and not feeling like we're losing time through that process?
I think that's exactly what I would have noted as well. I would also say that like 75% of my job when I work with a lot of dancers is developing supplemental strength training or supplemental exercises that they can be doing. Alyssa and I rarely pull dancers from dance. It's like, what are the things? It's a big mindset shift on, okay, I can't do this, but what can you do? You can do a lot of different things at the studio. But that's like developing that relationship with the teachers too. Whether that's coming from the two of us, that we can write a note. We can also like get on the phone and talk with a studio owner. Like, we do have time in our daily lives to do that. Alyssa and I own private practices for that reason, to be able to really look at this from like a whole dancer model on, okay, you can't do an entire leaps and turns class, but you can be working on these supplemental exercises in the back and working on your visualization of what that movement does look like. Maybe you have 1 to 2 mental performance concepts that Tasha has provided your dancer to work on in the back. Can you be doing that while you're working on a strengthening your routine, while you're still keeping a positive engagement with the other dancers? And that's also working with that comparison piece. So it really is the blend between the physical and the mental with that, versus just sitting and watching. I have athletes that are not just dancers, that they may be basketball players. I also don't come from a dance background, where they're sitting on their phones on the sideline, texting, not paying attention. That coach is not going to turn around and go put that player back on the field or back on the court. The same thing in the studio. If you're a dancer and you're sitting in the back of the classroom, you're not really paying attention, we're not talking to your teacher about your goals, are they gonna wanna put you on stage? Probably not. Because they don't feel that you're as invested as they are. Your dance teachers, they typically want the best for you if it's the right environment that aligns with your values as well. So if that's the case, like having that open communication on, you know, hey Alyssa, I really wanna be back on stage. I really want this role. I'm really struggling with this injury. What are some things I can work on at the studio? And then you come in and you talk to your physical therapy team on, okay, these are the things my teacher says I need to be doing. What can I start to work on in the meantime so you're prepped, ready to go? Cardio is a great example of that. If you're sitting on your butt for 2 weeks, do you think you're gonna be breathing really heavy on stage? Oh yeah, none of you are shaking your head. You're gonna be way out of shape. And so if that's the case, what are some things that we can do, whether you're at the studio or at home, things like that, that you're also managing that stress level to be able to go back on?
I would also say too, we can't, and I try not to make this too sports psych-ish, but visualization and mental rehearsal is huge for injuries. There's so much research that shows, I'll tell one quick story here. The coolest thing I've ever heard out of the mental visualization training that I've gotten is there was a man in Vietnam who became a prisoner of war, and he was a golfer before he went over to war, and he was captured for 4 years, and he rehearsed his favorite golf course. In his head, he played that course every single day, all 18 holes. And when he got out, I don't know how many of you are familiar with golf, but he came home and did a little bit of medical rehab to get him a little bit more stable. His first time out on the golf course, he hit par after not playing and being a prisoner of war for 4 years. So there's so much to be said about mental visualization. What is your dance? What is your technique? What are your routines? Just doing it over and over again in your mind when you are injured. You are training. You are training.
Thank you. Just being mindful of time since we have to continue with our day. I know that in an auditorium full of other people, it might be intimidating to ask some of the questions that maybe you did want to ask, so make sure to visit them in the lobby. I know some of you dancers are going to be in master classes and competing later on, but the other dancers who are here, feel free to go. Parents, you have more free time, obviously, so if you guys want to go as well, feel free to do so. But thank you so much. We look forward to seeing Category 3 soon. All right, take care. Wonderful to have you.
Yeah, great to meet you.